Hey there, community bankers. Welcome back to the Correspondent podcast. I'm your host, Madison Kaplinger, and as a bank marketer myself, I'm very excited about today's conversation. In today's competitive environment, every part of your customer's journey is under scrutiny, and this is especially true of your onboarding process. How can your bank onboard customers effectively, remaining efficient while maintaining that personal touch that community banks do so well? I got to speak with Kyle Herschberger of Cross Financial in Omaha, Nebraska about this topic. It was such a helpful conversation, and I hope you find ideas and strategies within it that will work well for your community bank. Hey there, community bankers. I'm here today with Kyle Herschberger from Cross Financial. Kyle, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Madison. Thanks for having me.
So Kyle is a self-described bank marketing enthusiast, here to talk to us today about an effective customer onboarding process for community banks. So Kyle, give us a quick rundown of kind of your experience and background.
Sure. Thanks, Madison. Um, I am president of Cross Financial. We are lucky enough this June to celebrate our 30th anniversary. We are located dab smack in the middle of the United States in Lincoln, Nebraska, and we are a community bank marketing consulting company. That kind of, we get to wear the consultant hat and say, oh, yeah, I'm a consultant. But we help community banks with strategic planning, research, both internal with employees and external with customers, staff training and development, and marketing, branding, and advertising. I myself have been in banking for over 20 years now. I started as a teller in the drive-in in high school and just worked my way through the organization. I had a short stint in banking software and then landed here about 17 years ago at Cross Financial. And I'm really happy to be here and talk about customer onboarding and where that kind of dovetails into the customer experience. I guess before we jump into the conversation, I had a couple things that came to mind when you and I had our first initial conversations about onboarding. And the first one, a lot of times we see with our clients, is too complex. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. But one of the phrases that always came to mind when it came to customer onboarding was the KISS method, and keep it simple, stupid, because there is part of that where to keep it as simple as possible, when it works, repeat it. It's never really a bad strategy to follow. And the other side of it is one of the statistics that came to mind was actually from Marketing Metrics, and the probability of selling to an existing customer is 60 to 70%. It drops all the way to 5 to 20 when I think about selling to a new prospect. So as you think about that new customer, getting them on board, they made their first purchase decision, we have a great chance during an onboarding process with a probability of 60 to 70% to sell something else. And so I'm excited to kind of dive deep into the weeds. The customer side of things is always an interesting moving landscape. So I'm sure there's a lot of different rabbit trails we can take it down today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you started with that because I was kind of curious what you were seeing, when you talk to community banks and how they're onboarding their customers. So the kind of too complex route, that's something you see commonly, a common mistake you're
It
saying?
is. It is. And whether it's because an automated system was put into place and it's got all these nice bells and whistles and we want to use all of them, well, in reality, if I'm a customer, the most simple approach is usually what resonates the best with me. And so you kind of think about the milestones in a customer relationship life. And I'm sure we'll dig into some of what those different things could be. But you think about just generally, I've visited your website, I called in, I sent an email, I made my first purchase decision, I opened that first account. Well, now I'm kind of in that honeymoon period of, okay, what's next? What feels right? And we may try to make it a bit too complex where we add too many different triggers and you hit me on the next day and 3 days later and 5, 10, 14, whatever it happens to be. And now I kind of feel like, well, now I'm just getting bombarded with these marketing messages rather than it being a simple, personalized offer for me. And I think one of the biggest probably complexity versus simplicity things that occur is where we don't rely on that relationship manager enough. And they are my first point of contact. I talked to them. They walked me through it. They're the ones that opened my account. Well, that direct contact, whoever that happens to be, maybe it's a cell phone number and I'm texting them, or it's an email address and I'm emailing them, or it's over the phone or in person and I know who I'm talking to. But then I go direct to that person rather than I'm banking with ABC Bank. And so if we don't leverage that relationship manager enough, now we've lost that personal, direct one-to-one connection where in reality, I've probably given enough information during the initial sales process that they're going to have a good idea on what should be next or what might resonate the best with them. Or I'm sure we'll talk about this later. What's my preferred communication method? Not just, well, you gathered everything from me the day I was there and, oh, now I've got his cell phone number and I got his email and whatever it happens to be. Well, no, do we even take the time to ask him, well, what would you like as your best communication method? I use my dad, who's a boomer here at the company, and me as a millennial is a good example. Cross Financial as a business could be a business customer for a bank across the United States. But if you're interacting with me versus him, our communication preferences change. So if we just apply blanket statements of, well, here's what we want this onboarding to be, and here's what it should be, and here's what the system does, if we don't take the time to say, well, Kyle may appreciate a text or an email, and Tom would actually appreciate a phone call or an in-person visit, now we've missed the mark on what would actually resonate with us, and now we're more likely to say yes to the next thing.
So we've talked a little bit about kind of some of the mistakes that you're seeing, and you touched on ways to do it right. But in your view, what are some of the most important keys to an effective onboarding process for a community bank's new customers?
I think that personalization I mentioned earlier is key. And whether that's by channel preference or including my name into it or something relevant about what I've already opened, because not only are we now saying, okay, this is a communication to Kyle Herschberger of Cross Financial, but it's also now saying, okay, we're going to confirm the purchase decision of whatever that initial core product or service was. And then now we know what's most likely in that sequence or what's likely to be combined with it. And if we utilize really simple skills like suggestive selling, where we're going to say something that's specific, easy to understand, and appropriate, now we can have that next yes come a lot easier, and it resonates with me. And suggestive selling, we experience that all over the place. The old McDonald's, would you like to supersize that today, was kind of the OG suggestive sell. And in most cases, it works 1 out of 3 times because it just feels like, well, I'm already here. Would you like a pair of socks with that shoes today? Would you like an extra shot of espresso in your coffee today? Really appropriate. Well, now think about if we led with a checking account, what other ancillary services, debit cards, online banking, mobile banking, e-statements, could we be suggesting that if we didn't get them signed up for at the time of original purchase, it makes a lot of sense to ask about it now? Or you think about on a business side of things, if we lead with the loan, more than likely they have a checking account somewhere else if we don't have it. Well, now that's very specific, easy to understand, and appropriate, and that may be the next decision we need to talk to them about. And then most likely we've learned a little bit about that during the discovery process. So I think when you think about important keys, the personalization is key, and how we leverage that information is next, because we took the time to ask some questions. It's not very often where that customer walks in knowing exactly what they want and need, and they open it and we're done. There's going to be some shift in thought process. Or I walk in thinking I want the basic free checking account, and the institution happens to have some level of rewards or interest earning account that I end up converting into because that makes the most sense for me in my situation. Well, now we're in a different landscape than what even my initial thought process was. So taking the time to talk about some of those things, figure out what that looks like, and then what is that next likely purchase in that sequence, or what could be combined with it. Okay, let's figure out what that is, what makes the most sense. Not just, well, I talked to Kyle and he said this, okay, let's go there. Let's make sure we're taking the time to figure out what is the best option for me.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like it's all about building that relationship, which is an area where we know community banks tend to excel, especially compared to, some of the larger institutions, that intimate customer knowledge.
Exactly. And it's the personal touch. And whether it's the teller, the personal banker, the universal banker, whoever it is, they're that relationship manager. They're the ones managing that relationship between the customer and the institution. And community banks do it so well because their staff has been equipped to say, you know what, take the time to talk to these customers, find out about them. It's not just Kyle Herschberger walked in the door. Well, Kyle Herschberger, president of Cross Financial. Okay, now there's a business relationship there. Kyle Herschberger married to Jesse Herschberger. Okay, now there's a relationship for the family unit there. Now you dive deeper and you talk about my children, and then you learn their names and you learn their activities. And before too long, I feel directly connected to that bank employee, not just the institution. And now that relationship manager has the best access to, well, you know what, we were talking about your daughter's soccer team and this and that. And before too long, it leads into, well, do you think this would be a good option for her and her first checking account, her first bank account? And now it's like, well, I didn't even think about opening that today. I was just talking about my own personal account or an account for the business. And they tie it into something else because the onboarding isn't just this runway of steps. And we created this spreadsheet, or it's in this document, and we're going to follow these so rigidly to step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. No, let's figure out how to make it personal and feel right for that customer. If there happens to be some steps in there that we skip just based on things we've already talked about, that's fine. Because the last thing I want as a customer is repetition, where I'm getting a notification that we already talked about while we were in person, or I'm getting something extra that, well, this doesn't even apply to me. You call to make sure that, well, did your debit card arrive and is it working properly? Okay, that matters. Or maybe they do instant issue in the branch and you walked out with your debit card, but they're calling to make sure, okay, I see you made a few purchases. Is it working the way you expected it to? Different things like that, so that we can make it personal to the relationship, not just, well, Kyle Herschberger walked in. There's so much more to that relationship, and that employee in a community bank is key to that. And when you think about the communication methods, now, if I'm apt to text and email, well, is that relationship manager equipped for that? Does our onboarding process even allow for that? Those are the kind of questions that we can start to ask from an internal side based on feedback we've gotten from customers.
I think there's a perception out there, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that there's a perception out there that there's kind of an either or to, the personalization and the, having that relationship with the customer where you get to know them, and efficiency or, speed, basically.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So but, ideally, you want both. As a customer, you would want to walk in and feel like your bank knows you and understands your needs and they're acting accordingly, but also you don't want to be waiting in line all day or waiting for your, mobile app to load all day. So how can community banks ensure a seamless and efficient onboarding experience for their customers, but still maintain that personalization that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question, Madison. I think if you take the limiting the complexity we talked about earlier, the relationship managers owning that customer experience because they're gonna know what the customer wants the best. I think training is probably that next step and layer of how can we ensure a seamless onboarding process. And what I mean by that is we may in a management meeting come up with this great marketing driven onboarding process, and then we take it to the staff, and then that's all we do. Well, at that point, do I feel like as an employee of the institution, I'm ready to do that? maybe I'm not even comfortable having some of those conversations with customers. I may be really good at it, I'm just not comfortable with it. Well, how do we educate the employees, create some kind of training for those relationship managers so that they are now fully equipped to deliver that onboarding process from start to finish and still keep that personalized approach? They're going to kind of manage and balance what the institution wants. Because at the same time, efficiency is huge. And where we can leverage technology and automation where it's appropriate, that's fantastic. Maybe there is a bit of triggers and tickler files and different things like that at play. The other side of that is, in addition to the training, what kind of accountabilities are at play so that I actually am doing what you're expecting me to do with each customer that walks in? Am I hitting the right marks, or am I developing and furthering that relationship? Because we've entered into a world, we use a phrase every once in a while around our office called phygital. And it's the digital and the physical blending together, because through the pandemic, if it taught us anything, we are now technology savvy more than we ever have been before. And whether it's an ATM or an interactive teller machine, online banking, mobile banking, or a branch that's right down the street that I drive by when I drop my kids off at whatever I'm driving them to. Well, how do I blend all of that together, not just from a servicing environment for the customer experience, but into that onboarding process, so that if I go visit an ATM to withdraw cash from my new account in the first 90 days of opening my account, is there some trigger in that system that ATM screen flashes for me based on an offer that would be relevant for me, based on activity, other things like that, as just another reference point and confirming my purchase decision on, we sure hope your new account's working out the way you thought it would, or different things like that. Or am I just getting the standard screens that everyone else would get? And some of that is allowed and not allowed based on whatever core system that institution's on, or whether the technology will support some of that. But are we even taking the time to think about some of that? Because when you think of seamless and efficiency, they don't always go together, because sometimes we may balance a bit more. Well, we're going to be efficient, but it's not as personal, or we're really personal, but now we're not efficient because it's really manual. And so you kind of have to find that balance within the institution. And sometimes it's based on the core system and technology and software they're utilizing. Is it allowed in the system? Is it not? How easy is it to integrate? Different things like that. And kind of goes back to my initial statement of keeping it simple. If the system won't do it efficiently, is there a way we can just do it manually but keep it simple? Because the last thing we want is a spreadsheet with 10 tabs and whatever else we've got going on, and we're trying to manage all of this across a branch network while still doing our other daily duties. Because the other part of this onboarding is time management. And I have a to-do list of things that you need me to do each and every day, or depending on if it's a busy day on the telephones or in the branch, okay, what's customer traffic like that day? Well, now my time is spent on the servicing environment, and I may not have the time to actually do the onboarding steps I'm being asked to do. And so we have to kind of give and take where we can add efficiency and technology will help us. Great, let's figure out where that is, but not at the expense of the experience, so that I feel like, okay, my inbox is now flooded with a message once a week from the bank with my next offer or marketing message. And now I just feel like I'm getting regular marketing rather than personalized or specific onboarding messages based on what I have done previously.
I'm sure you're aware there's a field of digital marketing called like user experience. That, and like user experience, I'm trying to think what a title would be, but like, so I'm thinking, does user experience testing come into play with the onboarding process, where you have someone, go to your website and tell them, like, go try to open an account, or, try to do this, and you figure out where the pain points of the process are. Like, where are the pain points of your onboarding process?
And I think that user experience, combine it with the customer experience, it's kind of into that phygital world of, well, if no matter where I go, if I call the number because I Googled it and that's the first number that popped up on my phone, and I clicked it and it called whatever number, it routes into your institution. Or I Google your bank, I get to your website. How many clicks does it take me to get to where now I actually have opened that account? And
Yeah.
maybe your institution does or doesn't allow online account opening. If it does, what's that process like? If it doesn't, is there even an initial step on your website that just triggers, okay, I would like to open an account, and now someone is proactively responding to me? And then follow that all the way through from opening to getting my account documentation and items through the first 30, 60, 90 days. Because, the other thing you think about, there is no perfect system for what those days are, months are, quarterly check-ins, annual check-ins, whatever it is. But if we at least take the time to think about some of it, hey, you opened an account, I followed up with a personal note, handwritten within the first week. Could every relationship manager at my institution do that? And just start with kind of a simple minimum. Now build on from there. Could it be, okay, in the first month we check in with something. In the first 90 days we offer the next product or solution. Are we even checking in on an annual basis based on their account date? I mean, we know we've got it in the system somewhere based on we put it in the system on X. Well, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And then on an annualized basis, okay, are we asking, are we tapping, are we having communications? Birthdays is another one. I mean, we know we're collecting that information. How often are we actually sending birthday messages? We know it's in there. We know they're getting them from other retail experiences. Think about how many different places you put your birth date in and you get a birthday offer or a birthday freebie. Well, are we even checking in with those customers on points, dates, and time that we know are relevant for them?
So something you said made me curious. What role do you think customer education plays in the onboarding process, and how do you kind of effectively incorporate that piece of it into your onboarding strategy?
That is a great question, because you think about that education and financial literacy is huge in community banking. I mean, you think about community banks educating even the youth in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools.
Yeah.
Well, what can we do to customers that are coming in with a varied amount of knowledge? You look at people like us working in the industry. Okay, well, we just know everything that's there. But you know what? There's still something somewhere that pops up because I'm not thinking about it for me and my situation or me and my business. I'm just
Right.
going about my business. So we can't take for granted, well, they just know that already. So I think some of the personalization to the situation needs to be there, because you're going to have customers that probably need to be more educated than others. So I think there's part of that if you think about, could we do more of a direct connection rather than a standardized message? Not just, well, I've got all of this stuff in the can ready to send out. Okay, maybe I start there, but could I modify it to fit that person based on their situation and where they're at in that process? But one of the biggest kind of impactful pieces we can do in that customer education is using stories. You think about the empathy that comes from educating customers, talking about stories about how other customers succeeded in something, or they had this problem and here's how they overcame it. Because that story level really puts the empathy of, okay, I can see myself in that situation. Here's how another business utilized this service. Oh, I never really thought about that for me in my business. We could do that. Or, well, that family does this product. They leveraged this asset. They converted into this product or service. Okay, now I can see how that plays out for me and my family. And I may have never thought about utilizing my account in that fashion or adding that product or service to it. Because I think one thing a lot of community banks take for granted from time to time is how much stuff they can actually do for a customer. They don't think about it because they're in it every day. And I have all these other departments and people and resources and referrals I can make. But then a customer walks in, and depending on an institution they came from, their life cycle, how educated they are or not, well, now I have the opportunity to actually explain to them all the different ways we can help them, all the different products and services we can offer them. Now, Do I want to brochure dump them from day one? Absolutely not, because now they feel overwhelmed and I don't really know what I should do here. But over time, if we can slowly introduce things to them that are relevant for them, you think about if a community bank has insurance service, investment service, wealth management, trust services, how often are we actually talking about those after an initial product discussion? Okay, well, they came and did their home loan with us, or we did a home equity loan. Well, if we offer some type of home insurance product, are we actually talking about that? Or is it just a throwaway and we expect that they've already got the insurance somewhere else and they won't want to move it? Real simple things that we may take for granted as a bank because we're living it every day. Well, let's educate the customers on that so that they don't end up self-selecting into a bad product or service. Because the worst thing that can happen is if we don't educate them, they kind of pick and choose based on whatever they read online or heard on a podcast or whatever it happens to be. And now they're self-selecting into something that may not be the best fit for them. So let's take the time to educate them a little bit, give them the resources. I think any type of online library of resources is great for a community bank to have as subpages of their website or blogs or different things like that, so that now it's a reference point that the customer can go out and do a bit of self-education, if you will, where, okay, I've got some time here, I'll actually take the time to read that. Or I received an email that asked me a question about, do you have enough for retirement? And now I start digging into reading more information on what it could be for me. What should it look like? What could it look like? And then I come back with questions. Because there's some of that education side, we have to make sure that we have enough communication methodologies built in so that they can actually respond and ask questions. We don't always get them as a captive audience and have a one-to-one verbal communication. Okay, do they have the ability to submit questions virtually through different channels or on their time? You look at a regular kind of 9 to 5 hour worker. Well, if they get off work and now they're looking for customer education, how many people at the institution are actually available to answer those? And are those employees equipped and trained enough to handle those inquiries? Or do we have a way that that customer can leave a message and we respond quickly?
I love that you've kind of married in like content strategy and storytelling, which is my area of, I hate to say expertise, but the area that I love, and bringing that into, customer onboarding, and which
Yeah,
I think is very smart because I mean, as a society, we're chronically online, and that's where people go to learn.
yep. And I am an older millennial, but I came from a generation where we Googled everything. I mean, if you
Yeah.
didn't know something, in 5 seconds, I could at least get to something that would generally tell me about it. Well, if we leave that up to the customer, they're going to end up going down a rabbit trail we may not want them going down, or getting bad advice that may not apply to their situation. If we can tell a story and create some of that, empathizing with the customer level, well, now they can see how it's going to help them, what it could do for them, what it should do for them. Because there's a lot of that where people get busy with their lives. I use myself as an example with our clients all the time. I mean, you think about being a business owner, a husband, a father, and now I have all this daily to-do list, and I'm juggling activities and meetings and in and out of the office and whatever it happens to be. I'm not going to take the time to think about our banking accounts all that often. Yet I'm in the banking industry. I should be relevant when I think about, okay, I am analyzing this on at least an annualized basis. So even someone like me who may be in it still needs education, still needs proactive storytelling, still needs, hey, Kyle, I've seen other businesses use this. Do you think that might work for you? Because now I have a choice and I didn't have to self-select. I actually had a recommendation. It was based on my situation. Because on the consumer level, that storytelling and empathy is so big. If an employee of an institution can look a customer or tell a customer, you know what, I know exactly how you feel. I have felt the exact same way, and here's what I and other customers have found, and here's your recommendation. Think about how impactful that is for them on, well, it's kind of hard to say no.
Yeah.
and it's an old Xerox, part of the old Xerox sales method was feel, felt, found. And it's just amazing how that can resonate, because now you see exactly how that's going to play out. Oh, I guess I never really thought of that. And if that worked for them, it's the same thing that happens in referrals and recommendations from your peers and family members. You're looking for something. Well, you should go talk to Joyce at the bank because this is what she did for me. Well, why wouldn't you go then start that? And I think that's probably another piece of onboarding that some institutions don't ask for enough, is once we have had a relationship that, based on measurements and tracking and accountabilities, we know is now a positive account relationship, are we actually asking them for referrals? Do we have some kind of telefriend program that we're introducing as part of that onboarding process to say, we sure hope you've enjoyed your experience with us. If you know anyone else who might, would you be willing to refer them? And creating a way for, whether it's a telefriend coupon or a cash incentive or a gift incentive, whatever it happens to be, but actually asking them, well, hey, who else might benefit from you? Because you think about your own life, social circles, church circles, youth sports, schools, whatever, colleagues, whatever it happens to be, you're going to run into somebody else that's similar life stage, whatever it happens to be, and they could probably benefit from the exact same products or solution you just got. Well, now let's leverage that. It makes that percentage of a prospect, that 5 to 20 that's so small. Now we can at least leverage the high side of that, if not more, because it's a really good lead. And that referral system matters. And I don't know how many community banks are building that into the onboarding process. Some of them just do it on an ongoing basis when I think about a customer experience or sales process. And sometimes there is a bit of gray area between onboarding and sales for a community bank, because sales is just part of most community banks' DNA. It's what they do all the time. We think about relationship development and growing relationships, finding new ones, usually within my silo of department that I happen to be in within the institution. And onboarding is just an extension of that. We're just kind of putting a face and structure to what some of that relationship development is in a specific situation of a new customer.
Yeah, absolutely. You've given some really wonderful ideas and strategies to enhance effective customer onboarding for community banks, but I'm curious, what are some of the common challenges or roadblocks that community banks face a lot of the time when onboarding their customers, and some ways that they can overcome some of those?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the roadblocks that pops up, we don't spend enough time thinking about customer needs. If you think about a customer walking in, they have a need. They may not exactly be thinking about it at the time, but they have one. And we use 4 buckets when we think about customer needs: saving, managing, borrowing, and protecting. And a customer is going to walk in with some need that will fall into one of those buckets. Well, if we just respond to, well, hey, they asked me about checking accounts, and so I fed them our latest product that we happen to be promoting at the time. Well, did we actually take the time to think about, they're talking about managing their money, and which account will help them do that the best? Let's start with that need. So I think focusing on the needs is probably one of those roadblocks we see. The other one, and I mentioned it earlier, employees are busy. I mean, their daily to-do list is long. And if they happen to be a working manager, and now they should be managing and leading employees, but they've got a lot of to-do list items on their daily list, now we've added onboarding into the list, and now it's just one extra thing that we hope they get to. So I think that falls into that mix of, okay, how do we overcome that? And some of that comes from accountabilities and measurement that we can have in there. So now it's just part of our performance management for that employee. And then that allows them to not really make excuses or ignore it. It's not just, well, I can forget about this and they won't ask me about it again. It truly is something, no, we want you to focus on this. We want you to focus on these steps. Another one that comes up is probably technology and automation driven, where maybe we rely too heavily on it. So we've got this system, we've got this great CRM, customer relationship management system. And once I put the account into the system and I input it properly, the system's just going to spit out exactly what it needs to. Well, one, did it actually do what we were hoping it would do? And two, did it actually resonate with the customer we were hoping it would? I mean, they got some marketing messages or they got some follow-up communications, but are we actually taking the time in that kind of personalized, direct one-to-one? Okay, we just wanted to follow up and make sure you did get that. There are some people that will be perfectly satisfactory. You think about, okay, I do my life through my email and my inbox, and I got all these messages from the bank there. Okay, that resonates enough with me, and I will respond or select where necessary. But now, if you get into some of the older generations, they want that personal connection. So, do we have a non-digital phone call built into there somewhere? Do we actually have handwritten notes or letters or some other form of communication where it feels more one-to-one so that they can actually feel like it's for them, that personal touch? Because I think there's part of that at play. And how to overcome some of that, pulling the managers in early, creating some buy-in. It's not just, well, executive management got together or we bought this solution from a provider and now we're going to implement it. Well, let's bring some of those key managers in during the setup process so that there's buy-in, and we create some of that teamwork and camaraderie as we're moving forward. Because the worst thing we can do in onboarding is give up. Because it's just amazing to me how often it's, well, we have this and we kind of do it. Barlow Research has a great stat where 85% of sales calls are 85% of sales are made after 6 calls. So it takes 6 calls to get to that sale. 85% of bankers stop trying after 3 calls. So they're 3 calls short of making that sale, and trust begins after the 3rd call. So if you think about that, we're only going halfway, and if we can go over halfway, we've built trust. But without that trust and without those additional calls, do we actually even have a chance? I mean, you kind of have to then catch lightning in a bottle, or it's a 50-50 coin flip, or whatever it happens to be, and we're just hoping for the best. Well, can we actually stay true to the system, stay true to the measurements and what we're actually going to hold ourselves accountable for, and stick to it? So if we say we are going to handwrite a note to every new customer within the first week, and then we do it, can we actually say we're going to follow up in a month with an additional offer? We're going to follow up in that 60, 90, like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't necessarily matter exactly what those dates are, but at least having them, and then try it for a while. I mean, if you have 4 or 5 steps based on what you've created in your system, try them for a while. If there are too many, could we cut one out or modify another? If there's not enough and we feel like, well, we kind of want more, okay, where could we add something to it? But I think so often as community bankers, we get to a point where it's like, well, they just keep saying no, or I keep talking about the same thing. Well, at some point, I may have to repeat that offer. I may have to keep asking about it. But don't just blanket statement it on, well, we keep sending them the same email and we hope that they get it. No, hey, I know we've talked about this before, but I just wanted to follow up on it again. Or maybe we modify the offer a little bit. We try a different story, or we try a different example to make it feel a bit different for them. How does it look? How does it feel? How can we change that moving forward?
So as we're talking, I kind of hear banker concerns about, especially in, this day and age, about, security, and whether that be, in person and or in the digital experience. It's obviously important to, protect our customers, protect their information, but also a lot of people tend to see security measures as kind of an annoyance. So I'm curious how community banks can strike a balance between implementing, really robust security measures that are going to protect them, protect their customers, but also providing a user-friendly onboarding experience for their customers.
Yeah, and that is certainly top of mind for community banks when you think about just compliance and security, IT security in general. I think one of the first steps is executives needing to clarify expectations so that we kind of know here are the railroad tracks we can work within, so that it isn't just this broad landscape and we're shotgunning approaches into, well, let's try this, or let's try this, or let's try this. And whether they're compliant or not, we're just trying everything. Well, let's find out what those expectations are. And then we need to have continuous communication and dialogues with those departments. So maybe it's an individual that wears multiple hats within the community bank institution, or maybe we actually have those departments. But you think about compliance and IT, marketing, operations, and those relationship managers, it has to just be one big loop of constant communication back and forth, so that as the landscape changes, which I think if the pandemic and the last 3 years have taught us anything, that change is just inevitable and it will happen on a daily ongoing basis. So it's just this constant flux. Well, without communication, are we really updating our employees on what's next? Or, oh, I didn't know that changed. Or, oh, we used to be able to do this and now we can't. I didn't even realize that. You think about opting in and opting out on email addresses and communications and different things like that. Well, if we don't have communications around it, we can't expect our staff to just inherently know through osmosis, oh, this is what changed or this is new. So we can't be surprised as they're having discussions with the customers about things. So that constant communication loop matters, because then we have the support behind the staff to conduct all of those activities, so that I'm a relationship manager and now I don't feel like I'm just off on an island and they told me to do this, so I'm going to do it, but I really don't know who, what, where, when, and why. Because in a lot of times that why, just explaining a bit about, well, it seems like we're having to jump through some hoops here. Yes, you are, and here's why. And here's the regulations or compliance that we're sticking to with this, so that they can realize that. Because in a lot of cases, with a little additional information, a little explanation, building on that why, we're going to create some buy-in pretty quickly. So I think there's a large part of that. The other thing, when you think about striking that balance, the simplicity matters, and maybe even limiting the scope of number of contacts can help, because then it keeps it simple, it keeps it manageable, and we don't feel like we've created this multi-prong approach and we're just worried about where they're going to go. So I think that simplicity can help an institution feel a bit more comfortable, and probably allow some operations or IT or compliance departments to just feel a bit more comfortable with what's going on, because we're actually talking about it ahead of time. It's not just, well, we rolled this program out a month ago and we've been doing this, but we didn't even talk to you about it ahead of time. Well, let's bring everybody to the table at the beginning, kind of hash it all out, kind of brainstorm into the game theory of what we think it's going to be, and then we implement, versus the old, well, I'm going to ask for forgiveness rather than permission kind of thing. So let's get everybody at a table ahead of time and figure out what it could and should be. Because when you talk about that user experience, the customer experience of that onboarding, we do want it to be user friendly. We don't want the customer to feel like they're having to jump through all of these different hoops just to get to an end game that they're hoping to purchase. And so where we can keep it simple, and automation probably helps us in some of that, to just make it as keeps the rigidity in play, but allows it to be as simple as possible, so that we can remain compliant and keep everyone up to date in that loop.
I think you've given a lot of great advice, and if I've heard it all right, it sounds like some of the keys are to an effective onboarding process are personalization, simplicity, internal communication, making sure everyone's on the same page, and training and that kind of thing. And I might throw customer education in there as well.
I would, and I think I'd call it a feedback loop somewhere in there, where don't be afraid to ask the customer questions. Don't be afraid to ask for feedback. It's the same thing when you think about a telefriend program. Don't be afraid to ask for it. And the relationship managers, those that are closest to the customer, are the perfect conduit for that gathering of customer feedback, customer insights. Did it work? Did it not? What kind of surveying could we add into this onboarding process? I mean, are there periods of time where we can actually gather how satisfied and loyal that customer is throughout the process based on their previous experiences throughout it? And there are real simple ways to do some of that, even manual ways to do some of that, even ad hoc casual ways where our employees are just having dialogues and kind of getting a feel for it. We can usually walk into a bank branch and get a feel for, well, does the staff seem positive or not? Well, that's going to be based on the customers, because there's a bit of a cycle loop with them where happy customers lead to happy employees and happy employees lead to happy customers, and it just kind of keeps continuing. Well, maybe we get a feel for some of that through customer feedback, but there are also processes we could apply into an onboarding program to gather some of that insights on their satisfaction or general loyalty. The typical net promoter score question of how likely are you to recommend ABC Bank to friends, family members, colleagues? Well, we can add precursors to that based on your experiences with ABC Bank up to this point, or if we're sending it out and we know how long they've been with us, asking them based on this last year of your new account with ABC Bank, how likely are you to recommend? And now we've added really key metrics that we can track, we can create accountabilities off of, and then we can actually look to influence for the positive. If they're not as high as we want them to be, okay, how can we make them higher? But until we ask the customers, hey, how is this actually going? We may or may not know. I mean, through osmosis and just, well, I sure hope that, I'm not assuming some of this stuff. Well, then let's actually ask.
Well, Kyle, that's all the questions that I had to throw out there as kind of points of discussion. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you think is important to add?
No, I think we kind of hit on all the high points as I was thinking about onboarding. I think for some institutions, if they don't have an onboarding process right now, it seems very overwhelming because it's like, well, we're starting from ground zero and we need to build some stuff. And I think that's where the simplicity can really help them. Try something. Find a little bit of something in that system that you can add into your existing processes and then see how it goes. And then as we can add automation and technology, it just kind of builds from there. Instead, I think, as we mentioned previously, I think sometimes we kind of rely on the technology and the automation too much, and we just hope it's going to work. And then it goes for a year, and then everybody's kind of surprised, oh, I didn't even know we were still doing that. So I think the communication is going to be key in that loop of let's talk about it. Let's make sure everybody is up to date and equipped. So that we actually know what's going on. The worst thing that can happen is we send out a onboarding communication to a customer, say with an offer or a special discount, and they walk into the branch with it, and then the employee's looking at them like, I don't even know what that is. So we need to make sure that we're constantly communicating all of that so that the entire team and the entire institution is on the same page.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining me today. You've given me and you've given our listeners so much valuable information, and I appreciate that you added, it can seem overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be, and it's ultimately going to, starting this process is ultimately going to help the bank rather than just be another thing on the to-do list. So thank you so much for joining and sharing your expertise. I think our community banks are going to get a lot out of it.
Yeah, thank you, Madison. This was a fun discussion.
Yes, it was.
Thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you've gotten some value from this conversation to take back to your community bank. Make sure to follow or subscribe to The Correspondent wherever you get your podcasts and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. See you next time.